Let's talk about what happens when a sleeping giant wakes up, not with a roar, but with quiet confidence, consistent progress, and a billion dreams aligned. When we talk about Donald Trump and his fear of India's growth, one of the deepest, often unspoken reasons is the remarkable rise of India as an economic powerhouse. This is not about politics alone, this is about perception power and the disruption of old world hierarchies, and that fear's real because India isn't coming. India is here, you see, for decades. India was seen through a narrow lens, poverty overpopulation, and a dependency on foreign aid, but that's not the India we're looking at today. Today's India is young, digital, bold, and building it is the fastest growing major economy in the world, outpacing developed nations in GDP growth. Even amidst global slowdowns, multinational companies are shifting their supply chains to Indian soil. The world's biggest tech companies are investing billions into India's markets, not out of charity but out of necessity. Now imagine standing at the helm of an America First ideology, a doctrine built on the belief that America should always lead, always dominate, always dictate the pace. What happens when another nation, one not from the Western Bloc, starts climbing not just fast but smart? That's a challenge, that's pressure that shakes the foundation of a worldview centered around the assumption that power doesn't shift, only solidifies. And for someone like Donald Trump, who built his political brand on restoring an image of American supremacy, India's economic leap isn't just progress, it's a threat to the script. Let's be clear, this isn't about fear of another country's success. It's about fear of losing monopoly over influence, and Trump's world deals are zero. Some you win, I lose, but India's rise is proof that global power can be shared, even multiplied, and that's not a message he can easily sell to his base. Because when India starts to dominate in pharmaceuticals, in tech services, in space exploration, and in green energy innovation, it pushes a new narrative into the world that leadership is no longer limited by geography or skin color or colonial legacy. And for a man who thrives on nostalgia, on a promise to return to a golden past, that future-focused India is more than competition, it's contradiction. And then there's this: the data doesn't lie. India is set to surpass major global economies in both production and consumer demand in the coming years. It's becoming a global hub for manufacturing, a center of fintech innovation, and a hotbed for unicorn startups. That's not just growth, that's transformation, and transformation at this scale means that US companies are increasingly looking eastward, not just for cheap labor, but for leadership that right there chips away at the narrative of American indispensability that Trump promotes. And what about perception? Trump's fear isn't rooted in logic alone. It's emotional, it's symbolic. India's story is a story of resilience of a nation once colonized, now claiming its place at the table. It is a narrative of democracy, of diversity, of ambition born from constraint, and that kind of story told over and over begins to capture the imagination of the world. And Trump knows the power of narrative. He built his empire on one. So when India's narrative begins to echo louder, deeper, wider, it threatens to drown out the sound of his own. India's rise is not a temporary flare. It is a sustained, deliberate ascent, and that kind of growth rooted in both numbers and national identity cannot be ignored. It can be denied, it can be feared, but it cannot be stopped. And perhaps deep down, that's exactly what frightens Donald Trump the most. Let's take a moment to really feel what's shifting beneath the surface of today's global power dynamics. It's not just GDP growth, it's not just political alliances, it's about people with skills, ideas, and determination. And when you look at where the world is turning for innovation, for resilience, for brain power, it's turning toward India. That is no accident, that is design. Because India isn't just competing, it's contributing, leading, and reshaping entire industries with its deep reservoir of tech talent. And for someone like Donald Trump, who frames leadership through dominance and control, that kind of brain gain poses a challenge he cannot box into a border. Indian talent is no longer behind the curtain writing code on the global stage directing tech empires. Think about it, the CEO of Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, and countless others share Indian heritage. That's not symbolic, that's structural change. And it's not just at the top, from Silicon Valley to Singapore. Indian engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs are building systems, solving problems, and shaping the way billions of people live and work every single day. This isn't about outsourcing anymore, it's about ownership. And that shift from labor force to leadership force disrupts the comfort zone of anyone clinging to the old world order. Trump's political identity is rooted in the idea of bringing jobs back to America, back to familiar hands, back to a time when others were dependent, not driving. But Indian innovation flips that script, whether it's artificial intelligence, blockchain, biotech, or space tech. India is not playing catch-up, it's setting the pace. And this isn't a silent revolution, it's being noticed, it's being rewarded, and most importantly, it's being replicated. Indian-led startups are going global. Indian IT giants are creating intellectual property, not just delivering services, and this wave of innovation isn't coming for permission, it's coming with purpose. Now combine that talent engine with diplomacy and what you get is a different kind of fear, because India is not rising in isolation, it's forming relationships, building alliances, and expanding its reach in ways that are both smart and strategic. The United States may still have the biggest military, but India is playing a different game, one of balance, of regional influence, of quiet confidence. In forums like the Quad BRICS and the G20, India is no longer a passive attendee. It is a key voice shaping decisions that affect the global South, global trade, and global technology standards. That's what makes this moment so profound. India is not just leveraging its people, it's leveraging its position. A country that was once seen as a recipient of aid is now a driver of solutions. A bridge between East and West, and a counterbalance to China's assertiveness for Trump, whose foreign policy often boiled down to transactional deals and chest-thumping. This kind of multipolar cooperative rise is deeply uncomfortable, because it's not just about who wins the deal, it's about who writes the terms of the future. India's alliances are not about being against anyone. They are about standing for something: autonomy, resilience, and a voice that speaks on behalf of more than just itself. That voice is growing louder, backed by technology, talent, and trust, and the more India strengthens its global networks, the harder it becomes for singular forces like Trump's America. They dominate unchallenged, and that right there is the fear, because power is no longer what it used to be. It's no longer just in weapons, walls, or war rooms. It's in networks, it's in minds, it's in the quiet confidence of a nation that knows exactly where it's going. There's a kind of power that doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to march into a room demanding attention. It simply arrives with grace, with consistency, and with undeniable influence. That's the kind of power India is wielding today, through its culture, through its films, its music, its values, and its ancient wisdom repackaged for a global generation hungry for meaning. And when that kind of cultural influence begins to spread not by force, but by invitation, it quietly unsettles those who are used to being the loudest voice in the room. That is part of what unnerves someone like Donald Trump, because India's soft power doesn't look like a threat, but it shifts the world all the same. We live in a world where stories move faster than armies, where a Bollywood blockbuster can be streamed in 190 countries, where yoga born thousands of years ago on Indian soil is now practiced on rooftops in New York, and in classrooms in Paris, where Indian food, fashion, and festivals are not just consumed, but celebrated by people who have never even been to India. That is the reach of soft power. It enters hearts before it enters headlines. And while Trump has mastered the art of spectacle and noise, India's soft power works like water, steady, subtle, and impossible to hold back. This is not a new phenomenon, but its scale has changed. Indian creators are winning global awards. Indian authors, philosophers, and thought leaders are shaping public discourse far beyond their borders and Indian values. Family education, spirituality, community are being embraced in places where they were once dismissed as foreign or quaint. That cultural confidence speaks to something deeper, a nation no longer trying to imitate the West, but ready to influence the world on its own terms. Now, this rise in cultural influence runs parallel to another powerful shift: the way India is redefining leadership. Traditional leadership, especially the kind Trump embodies, is often loud, aggressive, and transactional. It's built on conquest, on who's in charge, who's winning, who's dominating. But India offers a different model, a leadership that listens, that collaborates, that thinks long-term. It doesn't come from a place of insecurity, it comes from centuries of wisdom, resilience, and understanding that strength doesn't always mean control. This softer, more empathetic form of leadership resonates in today's world, because people, especially young people, are looking for authenticity, for vision, for purpose, and they're finding it in India's story, a story of rising not by crushing others, but by lifting itself through education, through innovation, and through cultural pride. That kind of leadership doesn't just shift geopolitics, it shifts how we define power itself. For Trump, who built his image around being the boss, this new definition is hard to digest, because it doesn't play by his rules, it doesn't respond to threats, it doesn't back down, but it also doesn't rise just to challenge him. It rises because it's time, because the world is changing, because the energy is shifting from dominance to influence, from force to respect, from isolation to connection. And that's what makes India's growth so quietly radical. It's not just economic or strategic, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's rooted in a belief that true leadership comes from within, not from a podium, and that belief embodied by a billion people moving forward together is far more powerful than any fear. When we talk about feral unspoken fear, it's rarely about what's happening today. It's about what tomorrow might look like if we lose control of the narrative. That's the heart of what Donald Trump feels when he watches India step confidently into the global spotlight with a new kind of leadership. Not leadership rooted in domination, but in empathy, strategy, and long vision. Because let's be honest, what the world is craving right now isn't louder voices but wiser ones, and India, without needing to boast, is offering exactly that. In Trump's world, leadership is a deal, it's a win-lose equation, you either take or get taken. That's the model he's built his identity on: aggressive, transactional, unapologetic, but India doesn't operate in that same rhythm. Its leadership doesn't always come with a raised fist. Sometimes it looks like offering vaccines to neighboring countries during a global pandemic. Sometimes it's sending a successful lunar mission to the dark side of the moon, not to intimidate but to inspire, and sometimes it's just showing up in global forums with a calm, composed presence that says, "We're not here to follow, we're here to lead in our own way." That difference unsettles someone like Trump, because he built a brand on being the alpha, the loudest voice in the room. But India's leadership style doesn't need to dominate to be effective, it doesn't have to push others down to lift itself up. And in today's world where brute force and aggressive nationalism are losing their shine, India's style is gaining traction, not just in politics but in diplomacy, technology, and global problem solving. It's a leadership grounded in purpose, not performance. Think about how the global south sees India. Many don't just view it as a country, but as a symbol of what's possible. A democracy, diverse and noisy, yet still standing, a rising power that doesn't demand allegiance, but earns respect for countries watching the old world order fracture. India offers an alternative model, one where leadership is shared, not seized, where dignity isn't something you're granted by the West, it's something you walk in with. That's a shift Trump can't easily engage with because it doesn't fit into his playbook, it doesn't work in tweets or sound bites, it doesn't respond to intimidation or flashy gestures. It responds to depth, to consistency, to authenticity. And for someone who relies so heavily on controlling the stage, India's quiet but firm leadership feels like a disruption he can't ouch. India is showing the world that being measured is not being weak, that being collaborative is not being passive. It's proving that leadership can look like compassion, patience, and unwavering self-belief. That's not just inspiring, it's dangerous to those who only understand power as noise, because if the world begins to value substance over show, wisdom over ego, then where does that leave a figure like Trump? This is the deeper fear not just of India's growth, but of what it represents: a new era, a new kind of leader, one that doesn't need to fight for the spotlight because the spotlight slowly and steadily is coming to it, and no matter how much noise is made elsewhere, the world is beginning to listen. There's a quiet revolution happening right now, and it's not on television screens or in boardrooms, it's in the minds, dreams, and daily hustle of over 800 million young Indians. This is a generation that wasn't raised in the shadow of colonialism, but in the light of possibility. They aren't asking the world for permission, they are building, coding, designing, questioning, and they are doing it on their own terms. That's the heartbeat of modern India, and for someone like Donald Trump, who thrives on legacy power and control, that kind of restless, self-made energy feels like something he can't contain, predict, or dismiss. India has the youngest population of any major country, but youth here isn't just a number, it's a mindset, it's a movement. These young people are growing up in a world of digital tools, access to global platforms, and exposure to ideas from every corner of the planet. And what they're doing with it is powerful. They're not waiting to be recruited, they're launching startups, they're not asking to be noticed, they're building global audiences, they're not just studying what the West built, they're reinventing it, and that creates a future that doesn't revolve around any one country's dominance. It opens the door to a multipolar world where innovation is coming from every direction, including the Indian heartland. Trump's fear of India's growth isn't just about economic rivalry or geopolitical shifts. It's also about losing narrative control. His idea of greatness is rooted in returning to a time when America dictated global trends, when American youth were the standard bearers of ambition, but now it's Indian youth armed with smartphones, dreams, and a hunger for impact who are reshaping the global economy and rewriting the rule book. That kind of power can't be bombed or banned or bought. It can only be earned, and that's what India's youth are doing day by day. Break Through by breakthrough, look at where global venture capital is flowing, look at who's filling the ranks of the world's most influential tech labs, look at the rise of content creators, researchers and changemakers with Indian names and Indian stories. This generation isn't confined by borders or old world limitations. They're global thinkers rooted in local values, and they aren't interested in just being part of someone else's future. They're determined to shape their own. That's a kind of freedom that doesn't need a flag to be felt. It's lived every day in the determination of a student coding late into the night, or a young woman launching her own business from a small village with a Wi-Fi signal and a will. And this isn't a short-term trend, it's demographic momentum. India is on track to have the largest working-age population for the next several decades. That's not just a statistic, that's a statement about the future. It means innovation won't come from a single capital or continent anymore. It will come from a billion connected minds working toward a better tomorrow. And many of those minds will speak Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, Marathi, and 100 other languages that echo a shared sense of pride. What unnerves Trump and others who see global leadership as a zero-sum game is that this rising generation doesn't fear the future. They are the future, and they're not looking to fit into old models. They are building something entirely new, something that doesn't need approval, validation, or a seat at someone else's table, because they're making their own, quietly, fiercely, and unapologetically. There's something incredibly powerful about a nation that has learned not just to survive adversity, but to grow stronger because of it. India has faced colonization, partition, poverty, and global skepticism, but instead of letting those moments define its limitations, India has used them to shape its resilience. And that resilience, unyielding, self-assured, and deeply rooted in identity, is something that people like Donald Trump can't fully understand, let alone control, because when a nation rises with that kind of inner strength, it doesn't ask for validation, it claims its space. Trump's leadership thrives on leverage, on finding a nation's weak spot and pressing it for gain. But with India, that strategy doesn't quite land the way it used to. Not anymore. India has outgrown the stage, where it reacts out of desperation or seeks approval from the West. It has seen what being underestimated looks like, and it has used that underestimation as fuel. What unnerves someone like Trump is that India no longer fits into the convenient roles that once defined it. It's not dependent, it's not docile, and it's certainly not deterred by pressure tactics dressed up as policy. India's foreign policy today is fiercely independent. It doesn't shift to please, it engages where interests align and steps back when they don't. It negotiates firmly, whether it's with the US, Russia, China, or Europe, and it does this not with arrogance but with clarity about its own goals, values, and priorities. This self-respect isn't loud, but it is immovable. That kind of stance threatens leaders like Trump, who are used to either getting compliance or provoking confrontation. But India's strategy is different. It plays the long game. It doesn't need drama, it needs direction. And direction is exactly what India has. Look at how it handled global challenges during the pandemic. While the world scrambled, India produced and exported vaccines to over 70 countries, not for profit, for partnership. It built digital infrastructure like the Aadhaar system UPI, and a nationwide banking revolution that brought millions into the formal economy in just a few years, systems that global powers are now studying and in some cases trying to replicate. And all of this was done not by following someone else's model, but by building its own in its own way. Resilience in India's context doesn't just mean bouncing back. It means evolving, expanding, enduring. It means embracing challenges not as setbacks, but as tests of national character. And each time India passes those tests, whether in technology, diplomacy, or crisis management, it rewrites what it means to be a global leader. And that rewriting makes it harder and harder for traditional power brokers to hold on to their outdated assumptions. Trump's discomfort isn't just with India's growth. It's with the fact that India's growth doesn't rely on him or on any single global actor. It's driven by its own momentum, its own people, and its own vision that makes it unpredictable in the best way, because it cannot be bought, bullied, or boxed in. And for someone whose political brand depends on predictability, on controlling the narrative, that independence is unnerving. India isn't trying to mirror any other superpower. It's carving out something entirely its own, a fusion of ancient wisdom and modern innovation, of deep roots and bold ambition. And the world is watching, not because India is demanding attention, but because its strength, silent, steady, and self-made, is impossible to ignore.